Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we are joined by Associate Professor at Osgoode Hall Law School. He has researched and published in many different areas: constitutional law, multiculturalism, disability rights, access to justice. There, and teaches at Osgoode constitutional law, human rights, legal ethics, and appellate advocacy. And he's previously sat as the Vice Chair of the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario from 2008 to 2011. So thank you so much, Faisal, for joining us here today. And certainly I think you can do a lot more justice speaking on yourself there about your background. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how you got to where you are here at Osgoode and some of the stops you've had on the way.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me to your program. And I'm really happy to be able to share a little bit about myself. So in terms of my career trajectory, while I graduated law school, I went to law school not really with a clear idea about what I wanted to do specifically when I came out, but I had an idea about a feeling of what I was looking to find. I followed that feeling. It led me into, it actually led me onto a bit of a long and circuitous route to completion. I took 5 years to finish law school because in the middle of it, I decided that I needed to see more in the world than law school was allowing me to see. And so I actually left after second year and traveled the world and lived abroad for 2 years, working for human rights NGOs in the Middle East. And that really shaped and that happened at a time in my life where I was at an age where I was really open to being shaped. I mean, like everybody when they're in law school, or sorry, like most people when they come to law school, it's also a time of personal growth, not just of professional development. And so doing human rights work became my passion. I came back, finished law school, and sought articles that would allow me to do human rights work, which I was surprised to find was quite difficult. And so after a few years in practice, in which I was able to work on cases involving human rights, equality rights, anti-discrimination, and the interests affecting poor people, I left to go back to school to do a master's degree. And with an effort to deepen my knowledge and my credentials. As it turned out, that master's degree also proved to be the catalyst that would enable me to transition towards academia, which is what I've been doing since 2011. But I wasn't always on that trajectory. And in fact, before that, as you mentioned, I had the opportunity to take an appointment to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario in 2008, shortly after completing my LLM. And around the time that that new human rights legislation had just gone into effect that had essentially redesigned the entire system, and the tribunal was now kind of open for business as a direct access adjudication body for people in Ontario to bring complaints. And there was a flurry of appointments that I managed to secure one and began that. I was, as it turned out, quite young in that position, and it was a great opportunity to work with other adjudicators who were much more experienced than I was, and I learned a lot from them, and I learned a lot in that 3 years that I was on the tribunal. And it was that experience that opened the door to making the shift into academia, which I did when I was appointed to the full-time faculty at Osgoode in 2011. And I secured tenure and the associate professor position that I currently have in 2014.
All right, so look at I see a question here already about switching from the practicing of law to pursuing academia here. What can you maybe share sort of what was the difficulties there in terms of the parts of practicing law you found challenging, and then kind of looking towards moving into academics?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my trajectory is not really the model to follow if your goal is to be an academic. As I said, I didn't set out to be an academic. I kind of landed into it. As I said, I wanted to do good with law, and what I found was that was possible, but it was quite challenging as well. You know, the business model of running a law practice, of trying to do good with law while trying to do well for yourself, it was a question that really troubled me when I was in practice, and because it was a question that I thought there had to be an answer that was satisfactory, and I believe that there is. And for that reason, actually, that question, how can you do well and do good in law, has continued to inform my teaching interests. And I have actually been teaching for several years now a seminar at Osgoode called Beyond Bay Street, starting up a smaller solo practice. And that seminar takes as its kind of guiding light resolving this tension and finding the way to actualize that goal. And for me, it's been inspirational because I bring in speakers every year to that seminar, panels of 3. So I've had like 30 or 40 different lawyers visit that seminar, and they've each told stories of how they, in their own unique ways, are doing good and doing well in the practice of law. And I find that so inspirational. Maybe I was something of a failure, because some might see it that way, because I left practice for academia, but I didn't actually leave completely. And I'm one of the few full-time academics at Osgoode who maintains practice and a full membership in the Law Society, and I regularly appear before administrative tribunals and courts at all levels still.
Yeah, so how do you find that in terms of keeping your practice? I know you're still counsel there. What are the sort of things that you still sort of dabble, or how do you kind of divide up your time there between being a professor, and obviously it's not just lecturing, right? I mean, you still have to do research and things like that, and then focusing on practice, and how do you kind of decide which types of cases you're going to get involved with?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there's only so much time in the day and days in the week. So I look for things that will kind of allow multiple purpose. So in any case I get involved in, I'm looking for opportunities to include students, to give students opportunities to get experience, whether paid work or volunteer work, depending on the file. Most of the work I do is pro bono. Some of it is paid, and whenever, especially when it's paid work, I try to make opportunities for students. I also have been part of a law firm in a counsel role, which has been very beneficial for me since 2017. The firm is called Poor in Law, and it's a firm that embodies a lot of the values that I share. The people in that firm are people that I've known for over a decade and that I've worked with previously. And we've built a great team, and it gives me an opportunity to be part of a team and to have the benefits of firm life, everything from Christmas parties, to having juniors to work with. And I love that opportunity to blend my taste for teaching with my passion for litigation. And I'm happy to share the platform. And so I've done everything from trials to I'm working on a Supreme Court intervention right now, and I work with juniors on every single one of those things, and I give them access to opportunities, and that I find that really rewarding, because it's not just serving the client; it's also the collaboration and the camaraderie that comes with practicing law. That frankly, you don't get that in academia.
Yeah, so in terms of being a professor, you mentioned one course, and I'll certainly talk more about that. But what do you like most of being a professor there on the other side? Now, what's your favorite types of things to teach, and what do you enjoy from your time there at Osgoode?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I liked about practice and about litigation was the immediacy, and the thing that I like about academia is the opportunity to really take your time and to slow down and to dive deep. And I need both in my life. I like the pace of litigation, but I also like the pace of study and of research. And they're two very different paces, and they force you to develop different skills in different areas of your brain. And I find it a constant challenge to be shifting gears between the long game of academic research and study and deepening knowledge, and sometimes the more sort of quick strategic thinking and quick reactive decisions of a litigation or of a case, whatever stage it's at. And so, yeah, the thing that I was missing in practice was the opportunity to really sit with ideas, because I was having a lot of insight, especially in my early years of practice, and I wasn't having enough time to be able to reflect on it and to dig deeper and look into it and write about it. I've always enjoyed writing, and so that's what I find rewarding in academia, and I really like the energy that students bring to the law and to the study of law and to thinking about law. There's a kind of a freshness to the perspective, and I see it in the practitioners who come to the law school to visit in classes or to teach as adjuncts. The energy is infectious from the students. I don't think the students realize how much positivity their interest in the law exudes, and what a benefit that is for those of us who are able to be around them and to exchange ideas with them and have some small part in their journey of learning.
Now, I see something here about you've worked obviously with students at the law school, and you also work with junior associates there. What are some of the qualities that you would see in successful students who then transition into their careers, or something that they can kind of look to pick up while they're still students that'll benefit them for practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I work with a lot of young people in different contexts, like people coming up in the profession, whether in the law school or in the firm. And in fact, when I was in practice, I was in a small firm, and I ran the articling program, and I've done countless interviews. And the thing that has always made the difference is demonstrated interest. And that sounds like a technical phrase, but it's actually so important, like to demonstrate interest, not just to say words and not just to show things on a CV, but to be able, like, an interview is a tremendous opportunity to give something more than what you can convey in a CV. And I think it's that demonstrated interest. It's bringing something genuine and sincere and conveying a feeling that is real, that you can't convey on paper, and that the other methods of advocating for yourself in the job hunt will not accomplish. And so, what is it in the speed dating of OCIs or in the more long format interview that makes the difference? It's making the connection. I don't think it's about impressing with credentials. Those things matter for sure, but there's nothing more appealing than a candidate who really stands out. And the things that the people that have stood out for me when I've met them have been people who share something of themselves that is sincere, and that reveals their commitment or their interest or their passion for the things that they say that they're interested in. I don't know how else to kind of describe that. I hope that's not too vague.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you just you're talking about this course there, Beyond Bay Street, and I think very refreshing. I mean, right now, I know middle of November, it's the time where I just saw a post from Osgood, hey, our students did amazing on getting these second year summer jobs, right? And which is great, but what about all the other students, right? And I think even when I was a student, I remember going through that process, not being successful and thinking, well, what's next, right? And you're telling us here, Beyond Bay Street, I think it's a great course. They're a great message there for all the Osgood students or any law students right now about there are other options. So what can you share kind of from that course, kind of give us an overview? And I know you mentioned there's 30, 40 people coming in, and probably like all the people I've talked to, everyone has a little different take on how they've got there. So what can you maybe share with us that you would share with your students about, hey, what's here? There's more than just Bay Street out there. Here are some other opportunities.
Yeah, I was actually looking through your list of past guests, and you've had so many of my guests to that class as your guest here, because it's, you know, people doing interesting things with their life in law. You know, it's funny because the very first year that course was offered, it had a really bland name, Practice Management to Critical Exploration or something like that. And it was undersubscribed. It was the first year, it was a pilot. Nobody knew anything about it, didn't have a track record, but still it was undersubscribed. And it was almost canceled. And the next year I was like, no, we're not going to let this important seminar get canceled. We're going to rebrand it and make it relevant so people understand where we're coming from. And so that's where the Beyond Bay Street thing came from. And it was funny because some students really turned on that name, and it turned them off. It scared them because they didn't want to have that on their transcript because they were afraid of what potential employers on Bay Street would think. And you know, it did kind of alert me to the reality of the landscape out there. And frankly, the title is not a knock on Bay Street. It's an expression of the reality, which is that Bay Street is so dominant in the law school view of the legal profession that we need to widen our horizons in order to empower students to fully appreciate the value of this very expensive credential they're purchasing. And it's not just a credential that they're purchasing, but it is that. It's a very powerful tool in a contracting economy, in a world in which the ability to earn an income is not a given. Having a profession like the legal profession, whether as a paralegal or a lawyer, as a member of a law society in a monopolized market, there is tremendous power that comes with the power to hang a shingle that I have long felt law students, and probably perhaps paralegal students to a lesser extent actually, but like law students have been addicted to the idea of jobs, of employment. And you're professionals, for God's sake. You don't need to be employed. That's the message. There is freedom in autonomy. There's power in the shingle, and you can do it for yourself if you are motivated that way. And so it's a real message of empowerment through the course. And the students that take it understand that. And many of them, not surprisingly, come from families where their parents were entrepreneurs. Their personalities across the board are the kind of people they don't really like authority. They don't like bureaucracy. They don't necessarily want to be taking orders from anybody. They want to live the good life. They want to do well. They want to contribute to their community, and they see small and solo practice as the way to do it. A lot of them want to live in smaller towns. You know, the pandemic has awakened more of us to the good sense that comes with that, with fanning out, and the appeal of quieter life and smaller life. A lot of these people are like the law students who actually have their stuff figured out. You know, they're the ones that are actually thinking in concrete terms about their future, about self-directing their future rather than waiting for the profession to hand them a career. And that passive approach that most law students have, I think, is operates to many people's detriment, because that passivity causes them to feel powerless and lacking agency over their own careers, while taking on huge debt that is supposed to be empowering them, and yet they don't see where the empowerment comes from this, $100,000 degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important message there of empowerment. I'm actually teaching, or where my students are going through the boring, bland practice management course there in terms of the title there, as you were alluding to. And again, a lot of it is what are the things that you need to be taking care of or taking into consideration, in addition to obviously knowing the law, in terms of running a business, right? And you got to have that entrepreneurial sense to you, whether it's from family or you pick it up yourself. So in terms of getting that empowerment out, because again, a lot of students, whether they're paralegal students, whether they're law students, they feel dipping your toe kind of into that approach there, and being in business for yourself, it's an unknown, right? There's a little bit of a danger to that, and they're a little bit afraid, right? And that's why maybe that route of, okay, well, you know what, I have my articling job, I'm just going to article there, maybe they'll hire me back, maybe I can stay here for a few years, maybe I make partner. It seems a little bit more safer. So what can you say kind of to the students that would, or anyone listening, or as well as the students obviously you've taught in that course, about getting over that kind of fear or apprehension?
Well, you can't be a person that you're not. So a big part of it is knowing thyself. And so, we spend time in that seminar um, doing kind of self-awareness exercises. I kind of do it covertly because, law students don't really want to feel like they're going into some sort of self-analysis. But, I actually use things like drawing and group work and mind mapping type stuff, exercises, because like you actually have to, if you're thinking about a business and the business is tied to you, you're really the product, your professional services are the product. You have to know yourself, knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're bad at, knowing what you can handle, what you can't handle. Some people don't have high risk tolerance. Some people don't have some people want to make a lot of money. Some people don't need to make a lot of money. Some people are willing to take on more burden and risk. Others are not. So it may be that smaller solo practice is not for everybody, but it can be for a lot of people. But I think people have to first be very honest with themselves about what their capabilities and limitations are, and then develop a plan based on that. And that's what we do. That's actually what we do in the seminar. They start by setting some goals, and then by the end of the seminar, they've developed the framework for a business plan for a law firm or for their solo practice. And I've now been teaching it for 7 or 8 years. I've been able to bring back former students who have talked about actually implementing the plan that they developed in the seminar in real life. Not necessarily exactly how they planned it, but they talk about going back to their business plan and saying, thank God I spent those 2 months working on that thing in law school, because I certainly don't have the time now. And it was really useful, a really useful resource. So yeah, I would give credit to paralegal training programs though. And I actually reached out to a colleague at Seneca who teaches a practice management course and asked for her materials when I was developing this course at Osgood, and took some guidance from the way that paralegals were being taught about practice management in developing my seminar.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because certainly we would normally have that, typically we have that assignment. There's the same type of creative business plan. And I tell the same thing to students, well, don't just do this as an assignment. Look at it as this could be your business in as little as a year from now, because of, it's a 1-year program, right? By the time they get licensed 3 months, 4 months later, they're ready to go, right? And I think your students there hit the nail on the head of, you're not going to have that time when you're actually starting practice. You're just ready to roll, right? So I think it is something, and I'm glad that there are some things like that at Osgood and hopefully at other law schools, because I find sometimes there's that disconnect, and maybe you can talk about that, where in academics, right, you're learning a lot of the theory and sometimes you're missing, well, what's going to happen a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when you're actually practicing. And I think it's also great because you can definitely connect that because of your experience still practicing, that not too many other professors, right, would have that ability to kind of give you both of those approaches.
Yeah. Well, older folks in the profession have told me, back in the olden days, like, I don't know, 60s and 70s, when there was only a handful of law schools, if a student didn't have an art inclined position, often their professor would like call up a friend at a law firm and say, hey, I've got a great student, like hook them up, like that sort of stuff. There was this closeness. There always has been a closeness between the legal academy and the profession. I think with the rapid growth of the profession and more sort of formalization of the academy, over the last 15 to 20 years, we've seen it become more and more the norm to have PhD professors, whereas prior to that, that was not the convention. Typically, law professors were practitioners who might have done an LLM, but it was more of a professional school than a sort of academic discipline. But that shift has happened, and so I think it is fair to say that law professors today are more distant from the bar than they were in the past. But I like that idea, and so I try to facilitate whatever I can for my students, whatever contacts I have in the profession. And it works both ways, actually. Like, lawyers I know will call me or reach out to me. It happens all the time, and ask me if I know anybody who's looking for work or this sort of thing. And so, like, I think those informal networks, they work and they still exist. And I know there's the case against that kind of stuff, the equity case against that kind of stuff. But I can tell you, I'm a minority law professor, and I've always been deeply committed to mentoring minority law students. I mean, it just happens. Like, they come to me. I don't discriminate, but like, it just so happens that like Black and brown and Asian law students have identified with me, even if they don't share the same identity as me, but just because like I don't look like most of the other law professors. And so I don't see sharing my networks with minority law students or any law students that come that are part of my network or that are close to me as I actually see that as part of what the benefits of diversity are. What's the value of having diverse law faculties if diverse law faculties are not engaging in the same kinds of are not able to provide some sort of a benefit to the communities that their appointment to faculty are meant to inspire and appease. Minority law students are demanding greater diversity on faculty, and faculties are responding. What's the purpose of it? Is it just to have an appearance of diversity, or is it to have to make it something meaningful? And so, I try to develop meaningful relationships with students that actually serve their interests and mine. And I found that works quite well. The other thing is, like, I with my connection to the profession, I know that what I was told on my first day of law school still rings in my ears, and that is that it's not the first day of a 3-year degree, it's the first day of a 40-year career. And I really do take that to heart. And so my students are my future colleagues, and I treat them that way.
Now, speaking there of students and of the programs there, I think you're involved in mooting there. I think maybe a director of mooting there. Can you tell us a bit about, in terms of mentoring students and teaching them how to moot? And I know, for example, I'm on a board of directors of a organization called Dominion, that they're putting on a mock trial competition for high school students. And I think, again, we're seeing more and more emphasis on things like mooting and mock trials and of that nature. Can you talk maybe more about mooting and how you can help students in terms who are interested, but then they get afraid? And we were talking about apprehension there, who have that fear of public speaking and delivering submissions there, and then they get interrupted by the bench. I'm remembering a horror story when I did one of those moots and just fumbling one of those questions there. But what can you share from your experiences there?
Yeah, I didn't like mooting when I was in law school. I saw it as kind of like the football, of law school, like kind of like that jock thing. But I don't think it's that. And I mean, maybe it was that, and it isn't that anymore. I've seen great. Like, I've really enjoyed being the mooting director at Osgoode. I had a 5-year stint, and I've just started a fresh stint in July. And I love seeing students who are shy or who would not otherwise be, standing up and putting their voice out into a space and occupying that space at risk of being interrupted and all of that. And using it as a way to overcome, and I know that because I was a shy kid, and my parents were quite smart and put me in theater when I was young, not because I was theatrical, but probably because I was shy. and it really helped. And mooting, so the idea, like being able to climb into a role is a great way to get somebody who is really sort of stuck inside their head out of it, and to put on a different skin. And so it's like becoming Superman, right? You go into that phone booth and you come out like a lawyer, and you get up to make your appellate submissions, and you can actually be a different person. And so I like that. I like the kind of theatrical element, the performative element, and I really lean into that. So I've brought in theater coaches to work with mooting students, and it was really amazing to watch how uncomfortable these law students were with their bodies. Like they had never been asked to think about their bodies or do things with their bodies in law school. And this theater coach comes into a law school classroom and tells everybody, take off their shoes and get in the middle of the room and start like doing funny walks and stuff. And like, it was really, really funny to watch the law students. It wasn't computing, right? Like you tell them to think about something or tell them to write something. It's, but tell them to like run around or do silly movements, and they like got all stressed out. But anyway, it's like that kind of stuff I think is really great, and it's been very inspiring. And one of the most rewarding things about mooting is that I've heard from numerous students after they've graduated who've come back and told me, thank you for putting me on a moot team, because I know I wasn't very good when I tried out, but the experience of it has attracted so much, was such a conversation piece in interviews. I've now come to learn from talking to students how much lawyers, I guess because it's this old practice and it's something everybody relates to, everybody's done. So like just giving somebody an opportunity to moot gives them something they can talk about in a job interview, and it might even make the difference in getting a job. So that's been really rewarding to hear about that, because in those cases, those were students where like I was deliberately like giving them an opportunity. I thought like, here's somebody who's not very good, but they could get good. And that element of being kind of a scout for talent is something that I also enjoy in being the mooting director. I treat it like I'm kind of like, building teams, and they're going off to the Olympics to win, and there's that competitive spirit, but it's we try to make it competitive in the spirit of obviously learning, but obviously law students are a competitive bunch, so it's it works well.
Yeah. So in terms of that, when maybe it's let's use like the the day before the Olympic 100-meter dash or whatever event you want to use it as an example, what do you tell on the day of a moot or on the night before a moot in terms of getting ready for delivering your submissions? Or I think the toughest skill there is forgetting that you're not going to even get to deliver your submissions. You're going to get like 15 seconds in, and then there's going to be a question. What do you advise your students there to get them kind of mentally prepared for visualizing that success, again, like it's the Olympics, as you say?
It's not about you. I think that's like the biggest obstacle for a lot of people when they're mooting, is that like they think it's just all about them, understandably, right? But it's not at all. It's all about the judges, and so you're there to serve the judge, and that's like that actually shifts the reality for a lot of them, because like the thing that's stressing them out so much is that they think they're being examined, they're being tested, and that if they screw up, that they lose, or if they make a mistake, they lose points. And so it's just like, it's the wrong way to think about it, even though it's intuitively reasonable, but really, like, yeah, your job is to help the judge sort through what's in their mind, what they're confused about, what they're, the questions that they're trying to grapple with. And so that way, instead of terror, when you get interrupted and a question breaks your flow, you actually feel relief because the judge is giving you a peephole into their mind, and the judge is giving you an opportunity to connect. And so it completely turns everything on its head. Um, Instead of worrying about whether you've said the correct thing, you are really listening and looking to see whether you've given this person what they're asking for. Like, it's that simple, right? It's about a human uh, connection. It's not about, you know, the strength of the argument or the correctness of the claim or or whatever it is you're saying. It's about that, making that person feel heard and understood and answered. So, you know, how you do that, like, that's, I can't teach people how to do that, but like that I try to help shift their mindset, because, like, really the worst thing in mooting is to be interrupted with a question and to be sending all this negative energy to the bench. Like, I've been there. Having sat on the Human Rights Tribunal, I had the experience of having lawyers appear before me, and it's so obvious when they don't welcome questions or when they're hostile to you. And, you know, body language, I don't think advocates realize how transparent their nonverbal communication is. And you see it when you're in the role of being the person observing it. And so trying to change people's mindset is actually really important, because, you know, you can't control those unconscious physical responses that communicate things to the bench.
I don't know what happened. I guess maybe I got disconnected there, but hopefully it's saved everything. But maybe let's go into that question.
Okay. So yeah, since in 2013, Osgood launched what was at the time the first of its kind in the country. There's now at least two others, I believe, at UBC and at U of T. So it's an LLM program that offers essentially a 2-for-1. That's the great appeal. So before this program, before, let's say, the last 10 years, when I was in law school, for example, we would have these poor, lonely souls sitting in the back of our classrooms. One or two of them. I remember one guy in my class, a really interesting guy, Bulgarian lawyer. But they were out on their own. The system was, you'd come to Canada, you'd apply to the NCA, the National the committee of the Federation of Law Societies, would give you an assessment, tell you what you need to do, and you would either go out and take these ask law schools to let you take kind of one-off courses, and it was subject to law school's willingness, or the more common thing was self-study and write the exams administered directly by the Federation. And often it was like the equivalent of having to do 2 years of law school, like 8 courses is kind of the norm from what I've seen. And so Osgood saw an opportunity there to essentially create a 1-year LLM program with coursework that would satisfy most people's kind of core requirements, so that you could enroll in this program, do the courses that would satisfy the NCA requirements. Also, I say a twofer because it would also get you credit towards an LLM, a professional LLM. And on top of that, the huge benefit would be you'd have a cohort of classmates, and it's law school. And it's physically located at Osgood. So you've got these students in the libraries, and they're socializing, they're even interacting with the JD students. So all the great things that come with law school, and no longer being lost in the wilderness, building professional networks from the beginning, and so on. And so that's been a hugely successful program and is in high demand. And is, I think people enjoy it quite a bit. And from what I've seen, our graduates have been very successful.
I think before I cut out there, the last time I remember you were referencing your time as vice chair and hearing matters, I guess, there in terms of the Human Rights Tribunal. Maybe you could share a bit about that in terms of getting through that process there, and certainly in terms of having an application that goes to the tribunal, you had mentioned before how, having that time there, you learn really a lot about all of those matters and what ends up coming up to the tribunal in the end. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that experience and some of the different types of cases that kind of came before you.
Yeah, that was a really interesting experience, because I was a frontline legal services provider, really. My job involved adjudicating cases, but it also involved mediating cases. And in 3 years, I kept a log. I mediated over 200 cases, so that was like a huge chunk of what I did, and I really enjoyed that, because I would basically go into a room with these parties and invite them to tell me what their issues were. And this was in 2008, so the economy had just taken a hit. I was doing a lot of work in southwestern Ontario. I was going to Windsor a lot, where these like secondary industries, not the unionized auto workers, but like the smaller companies that feed those plants, they were laying people off. There was like lots of poverty. And so I was kind of learning about the impact of this global economic recession through these stories of like people that I was hearing from every single day, going into work and hearing them, and then helping them try to negotiate, settlements with their former employers. Like, so that, like, my memory of that time, 2008, 2009, 2010, it was such a dark time economically. And I was just, listening to stories of hardship every day, but feeling like I could actually do some small thing that would make something of a difference was surprised even me how satisfying that was. So getting, party, like a company and an employee, to a resolution where the company's paying the former employee, like, not even lots of money, like maybe $6,000, $7,000, for that for that person to kind of accept that they're not going to work there anymore, and they're going to go on with their life. Those sorts of, that kind of settlement making, or peacemaking, if you will. I hadn't realized how much satisfaction I would take from that. Like just resolving disputes, because it kind of felt to me that that's what being a lawyer is actually really should be about. And probably in that job, it was the chance that I had the most to do that. Now that, like, there's a lot of critiques about human rights mediation and settlement. So, and I'm not speaking to that. That's part of my research, and I do write about it. And I think there's a lot to be criticized about the privatization of human rights, and about the circumstances in which people settle their cases and sign. And I oversaw the signing of over 200, or every case that settled, there was a non-disclosure agreement. Ever since Me Too, these NDAs have become quite a dirty word, but that's standard practice in human rights settlements. So anyway, to answer your question, I personally learned a lot from hearing the experiences of people who'd been adversely affected by tough economic times. And I saw the challenges and the limitations of trying to use the law to obtain meaningful remedies for the injustices that they were facing. And on the whole, the human rights system was incapable of delivering meaningful remedies for people who were experiencing injustice. And most of the time, the human rights system is telling people, we can't help you. And I think that can be really demoralizing for people seeking to use the system, let alone people who are operating within the system.
Now, I mean, I think with that sort of mediation, adjudication kind of model, right, where you can mediate, and if it doesn't mediate, then it goes to the hearing, right? Is that something that you found? I don't know if it was still then back then, but in terms of, was that kind of, as you were mentioning here, getting some kind of satisfaction for those people who bring those applications, or otherwise, if the mediation wouldn't have worked, otherwise you would go to a different person to then do the adjudication. Did you find kind of that in those 200 cases that in the end, that it was better that there was something there rather than proceeding to a hearing where you don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah. There was, I remember one case that I failed to settle, and it went off to a hearing, and it ended up becoming a precedent-setting case on pregnancy discrimination. And so, like that's a good result. But that was somebody who had counsel, and they had the evidence, and they were able to establish the case. I think a lot of the time, I believe that litigation itself is harmful. Like there's inherent harm. It's not neutral, and so like I think we have an ethical duty as lawyers to warn our clients about that. Litigation is a necessary evil sometimes, but when you think about it that way, then I think you have to accept that settlement has inherent good. That's not to say that any settlement is better than no settlement, and it's not to say that every settlement is good, but I think settlement has inherent good because it does bring an end to the war. And like I'm a pacifist. Like I've seen the violence that litigation does to people's lives. I don't mean blood and guts. I mean like emotional violence, and psychics, like what it does to people's psyche. And so like I don't wish that upon. I think you must know, like anybody who's a lawyer or who is around lawyers they're litigation averse in their own lives, because it's totally rational to avoid that stuff. Yet we make our lives on representing people in litigation, those of us that do litigation. So I think there's like, it's a very, I also teach legal ethics. And so, the ethical context in which lawyers operate, especially when you're representing vulnerable people, which has been my experience, poor people who may not be able to afford the services you're providing them, these issues become quite challenging.
All right, so I see there's a few minutes left here, and I think I want to make sure that you're able to give. Actually, I see another question here, but what would you suggest to students that in what they do if they're not sure if they want to pursue academics, right? So maybe they do want to go into academia, maybe they want to be a lawyer. They're not quite sure, right? I mean, some people have that decision. Hey, I want to go into academics. I'm going to go get my LLM and PhD, and that's my path. But if you're not sure, what are some options that you can do if you later want to come back into being a professor, or maybe you decide you don't want to and you want to go and practice?
Well, how does one become an academic? That's one question, and that's like I don't really have advice for that, because it seems well, everything that I've been told is that is a very different path than the one that I followed, and so I find it hard to kind of advise people on how to become an academic. What I see from the inside is that it's extremely competitive from a hiring perspective. And it's very difficult to predict outcomes. So, and there's a fixed number of jobs. Like there's only so many law schools in the country. I'm not saying people shouldn't aspire to be legal academics, but I don't think that I have anything that I could say that would be useful to a general audience. In terms of the ability to kind of go between worlds within the law, one of the most satisfying periods of my professional life was when I was a practicing lawyer and an adjunct professor at Osgoode. That's how I started. And I quite likely would have been very happy to continue that way. So being an adjunct professor allows you to teach a course. Osgoode relies on adjuncts heavily to deliver the curriculum. And I know from students that they really value having practicing lawyers teach them. And I found that it really balanced my professional life. Like all the things that I like about teaching, it gave me access to that. I was coming up to campus once a week to teach the course during the semester that I was teaching it. And I had interactions with students, but I also was maintaining my full-time practice. And in a way, it was the reverse of the balance that I have now, and it was very satisfying. And so that, I think, is an easier path to pursue. It's one that any lawyer who has some expertise can pursue. You don't. I think a lot of our adjuncts do have graduate degrees, but you don't even have to have one. And there's different ways to get involved. OPD, Osgoode Professional Development, has even more opportunities for practicing lawyers. So I think for people who are practicing and they like education and they want to be connected back to the law school, there are many, many ways to do that without necessarily becoming a full-time academic.
That's great there to share, because obviously you can teach a course there as an adjunct or wherever. It did remind me as well. You had mentioned, because I went over and taught overseas right after law school, but your time there, and I wanted to ask about this because you had stopped law school there and you went and you were working with NGOs overseas. Kind of what brought you to take that break, and then what brought you back into law school? Because I mean, sometimes there are students that kind of take a break and then come back, and it may be difficult, right? It may be difficult to make that decision to pause and try to power through things. And maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, in my second year, I was feeling that that push towards Bay Street, or I felt that I was on some sort of a treadmill, and I just felt that I needed to get off in order to figure out where I wanted to be. So I didn't feel like I was in control. That was just unique to me. So that's why I left. And I think maybe I regretted not taking some time between undergrad and law school. I don't think I was prepared to just go straight through 7 years of post-secondary and then a career and not have any kind of something else in there. But in terms of what made me go back, it was actually like the rule at the law school. You have to complete your 3-year degree within 5 years. And so my parents would have never forgiven me. I had to go back. And thankfully I had that, because I could have, it gave me some concrete limit on what was, what you might perceive as a detour. I wouldn't say it was a detour at all. It was part of my journey, but I think it helped. And going back to law school was actually very, very good for me. And what I would say, I was a different student in third year compared to my first 2 years. A completely different student. My grades were totally different. My experience was totally different. I was a different guy in the classroom. In my first 2 years, I was, that quiet guy at the back, just trying to keep up. In my third year, I was that guy with his hand up in the front row every class, because I'd seen some stuff and I'd learned some stuff and I'd gained some perspective and I'd formed some opinions, and I'd aged 2 years. It made a big difference. And so I guess what I would say to those that are not sure if they're sure with what they're doing, if you take a pause and it feels right, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be different if you go back. Law school, third year of law school couldn't have been more different, and it's what opened the door, because it enabled me to get into a competitive grad program. It enabled me to come back and to have a good start to my career. It opened a lot of doors for me, and so I think that intuition that I had to pause was a good one to follow.
Perfect. So, Faisal, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today and sharing all of that. I think perhaps if you have any final words of wisdom, I know we've touched on all different topics and very free flowing there, but anything you can tell for students, and maybe going back to some of that experience you had there as well, or earlier we were talking about beyond Bay Street, and I think right now is a time especially if you go on social media, you hear, hey, welcome to our new associate, or sorry, welcome to our new students or our new articling students or whatever. And there are students, I remember even feeling the same way myself, 15 years ago. Hey, what about me, right? So what advice can you share for any students there as they're looking to get into the profession and make that transition?
Yeah, I'm nervous about advice. I try not to give advice, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about all this stuff. I haven't really thought about a lot of these things in a long time, and I hope that just what I've shared gives people some perspective. I would just say, I don't know how I would have survived in the era of social media, because I distinctly remember in law school, during November, for example, starting at this time of the year, I would deliberately avoid the library because I felt like the energy in that space was just too poisonous. It was negative. It was too much stress, too much, all that stuff going on. And I worry that, and so I could just avoid it, but I worry that it's harder and harder to avoid those sorts of things now because it's everywhere. It's all over social media. And so, yeah, I would just encourage people to really listen to themselves more than they listen to, all the static out there. Like, try to find that internal guide, and test it and try to gain confidence in it, and then you can rely on that, and then you don't have to be guessing at what on social media to rely on, most of which is unreliable. That's about it as far as advice. Sorry, I'm not much of, I don't know that I have much to say. I feel like people today, young people today, have a lot more insightful stuff for how to navigate the world, and I try to listen more than speak when it comes to that.
Perfect. No, that's great there. I mean, and again, everyone has their own path, and everyone has their own things that will help them on that path. And can you want to forge your own unique step into the profession there? So, thanks so much there. I'm sure your students there get so much insight from you, and I really appreciate you and one of your students here, Vivian here, put all of this together very quickly. I think this is probably the quickest turnaround in bringing someone on and going through it. So I really enjoyed it. And I wish you all the best there with everything at Osgood. And thanks again for joining.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it very much.